Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining in. This is Chantal, founder of the Finance Story. So every week we run a series where we talk to finance professionals, in different parts of the world to understand how did they pave their career and also to imbibe their learnings and experiences. So today I'm so excited to be speaking with Nick. So Nick is a seasoned professional, tax professional with over 34 years of experience. Nick started his career with Anderson in 1994 in their UK office and later moved to PwC South Africa, looking into their indirect tax practice, which grew significantly over the years. Nick has been with PwC, was with PwC for almost 15 years and rose to become a senior partner when in 2017, he decided to take a bold move and move to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia with KPMG. Currently, he is a partner at MMJS Consulting KSA. Nick is also an executive coach and mentor who has successfully supported professionals to transition their careers to senior leadership positions in the UK, Africa, and Middle East. So today we'll be talking to Nick about his journey, how he started out in a new country, that's Saudi, and of course, the opportunities for expats looking at careers in Saudi Arabia. Nick, thank you so much for joining in.
Pleasure.
Means a lot that you made the time to help us understand more about the career opportunities in the GCC region and in Saudi. So I'm so excited. Thank you again.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. So Nick, my first question is: could you go back, a little and help us understand your journey? How did you started out? Why taxation? And from '94 till date, you could give us a glimpse of your journey.
Sure. I'm afraid there's no science behind how I ended up in tax. I started my career as a scientist. I studied at university, did biology and chemistry. When I finished that, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I ended up joining the civil service in the UK and being assigned to HM Customs and Excise, which is now HMRC, doing VAT. And this is 30 odd years ago. So as you can imagine, it wasn't a well worn and trod path, if you like, in terms of doing taxation. But I enjoyed it. And I realized that I had a kind of knack for it. And from there, after 3 years, I joined the profession and started with Coopers and Lybrand. So going back again, 30 odd years now. So that was the story. It was kind of by chance, but and I think that's not unusual in life, I must say. I think often you fall into something which you hadn't necessarily imagined you would do. The trick is to recognize if you're enjoying it and then turn your attention to being good at it. And I think I decided at a young age that I enjoyed tax. I enjoyed the challenge of the technical side. I enjoyed the challenge of the commercial side, and then working with people. And I decided that I'd make my career in taxation. And I'm afraid it's not a very glamorous story, but that's how it happened.
Okay, that's nice. And everyone joining in, thank you so much for joining in. If you have questions, please, type in your questions and Nick will take it. Okay. So my next, yep. So my next question for you is, Nick, how did South Africa happen? Okay. So you were with PwC in South Africa and you were there for a very long time, right? 15 years. So could you just take us back through that journey?
Yes, it's a matter of curiosity. I think to be good at anything as a professional, you need to have intellectual curiosity. You need to be prepared to do the work, to understand your subject and your environment. And I always wanted to work outside of the UK, always wanted to lead a practice. I don't know why, it's just something I felt I'd like to try, implement some of the ideas I had around practice development, people development, etc. The opportunity came up and discussed it with my wife. We decided we'd have a go. So we went to South Africa in 98 with 2 young children. And it was exciting. It was something new. VAT had only been in the country, I think, 6 or 7 years. So it was still, under development. Jurisprudence was still quite thin on the ground. And so I was able to bring some of the more evolved techniques in terms of planning and advisory work to South Africa, and we did well, and we enjoyed it. I think the most important thing about wherever you work is you need to feel that excitement when you get up in the morning about the challenges ahead, the people you work with, the environment you're working in. And we found that in South Africa, and we stayed, and we had a fantastic time. And I must say, I have no complaints about what we managed to achieve there, both as a family, but also clearly as a professional.
That's amazing. So I understand. My next question was why Saudi, but I know the answer is curiosity. You wanted to explore a new region, okay? But let me add, okay? So, but when we think about the GCC region, okay, we think about Dubai first, right? So why did you think about Saudi first, okay? And you were already a senior partner, right? Very well settled, very at a senior level. So how did you decide on moving to a new geography, totally different from South Africa or from the UK?
I think there's a bit of nomad in my makeup. Even whilst I was in South Africa, I worked throughout sub-Saharan Africa. I was always traveling, always meeting new people, new clients, and building businesses around the region. So I'm quite happy to move. It's a question of whether you move for what I would call reasons that are going to help you progress. The option was Dubai or Saudi in 2017. Saudi to me presented a different challenge. It was a place where, with respect to Saudi, not a lot of people wanted to go. And I couldn't understand why. I'd never visited the country. But I thought from where it was economically, in terms of the development opportunities ahead, there'd be more interesting work and definitely more exciting challenges in Saudi Arabia. And I was proved right. We'll talk about Saudi, I guess, later on in the broadcast, but a really interesting part of the world, developing extremely quicker than I actually thought it would, if I'm being perfectly honest. And it presents some really exciting and innovative opportunities for us to practice as tax professionals. And so that's a choice which I'm very glad I made, because we've enjoyed it. It's been a really, really interesting ride.
Okay. Nick, could you elaborate what factors did you take into consideration, okay, when deciding, that, hey, I'm going to move to Saudi? Because it was not just you, right? There's a lot of aspects that come into
Yes.
family. So how did you decide? Did it take you a lot of time, to make a decision, or it was like quick?
No, you need to take your time with these things, because there are ramifications, as you quite rightly point out, Chantel. So we came to have a look, get a feel for the country, just Riyadh, because that's, I guess, the busiest part of the economy. I needed to know what types of clients there were. How is the economy made up? Was it a fully diverse economy or heavily reliant on petrochemicals and oil and gas? Again, I can explain and elaborate on that later. So long as you're in an environment where the normal rules of business apply, i.e. there are contracts, the bills are settled, you have decent discussions with clients about what they're looking for, you can come to agreements, and there's growth and expansion. Those are really good basic, let's say, prerequisites for any professional to do their work. And that's what I found when I got to Saudi. And then I was at KPMG for 5 years, a very welcoming firm, and they gave me the opportunity to pretty much do what I wanted to build the business. So those attributes were really important. If you're not allowed to do the job you think you're being hired to do, then clearly that's difficult, and I didn't get that sense at all. So those are the key considerations. And then living conditions are important, but again, we found great accommodation, made some great friends, which is also still friends to this day. So everything worked. And the time of life for my wife and I was, our children were grown up, so we didn't have to worry about things like school, which is a consideration if you're younger, clearly. So those things came into play, but once you ticked a few of those boxes, or enough of those boxes, it was kind of a bit of a no-brainer, really. And I never worked in this part of the world. I visited Dubai a few times, North Africa a few times, but never really, the heart of the Middle East. So that was something which I was excited about, to be in a different culture and to learn from that culture. I was very excited about that, and still am, for that matter. It's still a very, as I said, interesting place to live and to work.
Wow, that's exciting. So Nick, when you talk about 2017, right, around the same time, UAE had introduced VAT, or was introducing VAT in 2018, right?
Yes.
So Saudi, I guess, also in 2018. So did you have both the locations? Like, hey, I could look at Saudi, I could look at UAE as well, right? So could you do a little bit of a comparison? What did you see in the Saudi market that would help you in your career further? Okay, or what did you notice that said, hey, I'm going to go for this?
Well, I think the opportunity to be almost like the ground floor of the implementation of tax, and that you could say the same about Dubai. But I felt that Saudi presented more opportunity for me personally, because it's just a bigger economy. It's a way bigger economy. I think it's twice the size of Dubai, if not 2.5 times the size of Dubai, 3 times as many people. The land mass, I couldn't give you the calculation, but it's a really big piece of real estate. And I thought, well, this is somewhere where you can progress, you can sell work, deliver work. And we did some fantastic stuff, which I'm not sure we would have had the chance to do necessarily in Dubai. The other thing about the firm I was with, owned by Saudis, I know it's a global brand, but a very Saudi firm. It's changing, to be fair, but at the time it was quite a Saudi firm, which I quite liked, because I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to learn about anything about this culture, I do need to work with Saudi professionals and learn from them about their own culture. And I found, ironically, the very Arabic nature of Saudi, I found it very appealing. Whereas Dubai, I think we'd all agree, is very cosmopolitan, and it's great, and I love Dubai. But for what I wanted to achieve as a professional, Saudi fit the bill better.
Okay. So how is it fitting in culturally, be it in the organization, okay, and in the city, Riyadh? Like, how is it fitting in?
Okay, so look, it's changed an awful lot. When I first got here, women covered their heads, they wore abayas. Many of the ladies had the niqab. And there's some very quirky laws, which I won't bore you with, but they were strange, to say the least. Bylaws, and the religious police were still, there. But since that time, what we find now is that obviously ladies can drive, which it always makes people chuckle, myself included. It's not to me really that much of a privilege as such, but in the context of Saudi, it was a really big deal. The dress code has relaxed immeasurably, to the point where now that a lot of the ladies, whether they're foreigners or locals, don't wear abayas, don't cover their heads. You can if you want, but there's no kind of requirement. Restaurants, cafes, entertainment is completely different. We've got F1 now, Ronaldo is here, we've got the boxing, golf. I mean, stuff which was not existing literally 5 years ago is all here. And and which means that the people, all people, wherever they come from, are much more, I think, quite more relaxed and getting a chance to express themselves, which is important, obviously, in any culture. It's amazing. Some of the projects that are being set up and implemented are quite astounding rather. And that's exciting too. And I think, I'm not sure there are too many countries in the world, I think there probably aren't any other than maybe Dubai, where you're seeing any kind of scale of infrastructure development and like you're seeing in Saudi. And it's another reason why it's exciting to be here.
Wow. So Saudi is all over the news, right? Everyone's so curious about the opportunities, So we know that in Saudi, of course, a lot of preference is given to their educated citizens to enter the organizations and the working
Sure,
system. But,
sure.
but from what we see, there's a lot of they're trying to attract a lot of international talent as well.
Yes.
Correct. So when you talk about international talent, okay, what kind of opportunities do you see that finance guys, tax guys, consulting guys can find in, and where does the
Yeah,
hiring happen? Could you give us the ground level view?
I can. So if we talk about finance in a more general sense, senior financial personnel, CFO level and group accountant level, for some of these huge projects, and also some of the very fast growing groups, there are loads of opportunities. At the moment, many nationalities are being used to occupy those roles. So there's no restriction on nationality, quite frankly. We work with all kinds of people from virtually every part of the world, which is, again, quite interesting. It's a very multicultural country, although it doesn't appear so from the outside looking in. Once you're here, you realize that loads of different types of people are here, which is actually quite nice. From a tax point of view, when I first got here, there was no such thing as a head of tax in any commercial organization, excepting obviously professional services. Now, virtually every organization of any meaningful size has somebody responsible for tax. It may be part of the accounting team, which I wouldn't necessarily support, I must be honest, but there are loads of heads of tax positions, whether it's in insurance, retail banking, asset management, construction, distribution, you name it. And that's a really marked change in the last 5 years. It's accelerated really, really quickly. There's specialization. I know like heads of VAT or senior VAT personnel who look after only that tax in large organizations, especially more complex one, financial services, telcos. So from having no real appreciation for the importance of the tax profession, it's changed almost completely in the last 5 years. So now if you want a career in tax, whether it's in the profession or whether it's in the law firm or whether it's in industry, those opportunities are there. In the major taxes, by that I mean international trade, customs specifically, and depending on the type of business, obviously, indirect taxes, specifically regional real estate transaction tax, VAT, and then in direct taxes, and that's specifically corporate tax, withholding, capital gains, and zakat's obviously kind of included in direct taxes as well. So the industry has just kind of exploded. And so there are a lot of opportunities for skilled tax professionals in Saudi, which weren't necessarily there before when I first got here 5 years ago.
Okay. Okay. So when you say there's a need for skilled tax professionals, and including CFOs and financial controllers, the senior guys, okay, with more experience, okay. So there is a lot of, so because Saudi is growing so quickly, exponentially, right? So the opening, the job opportunities are a lot. Like so when we look at Vision 2030, they said, hey, almost 400,000 new roles will be created, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the percentage for finance guys? Is it a lot, or it's like 100 to 100?
Ooh, that's quite a tough one to answer. A lot of the roles that you're going to find in some of these major projects are to do with construction, whether it's project management, delivery, that kind of role. Because you can imagine these projects are humongous, and it takes a lot of people to deliver, for example, a hotel, and it's a major hotel is being built here. So to be honest, I can't answer that question. I wouldn't imagine it's a huge percentage. Why? Because the accounting isn't, and the tax stuff is not what they're there to do. The businesses are there to build, construct, deliver, manufacture, and so the finance is just the kind of glue that holds stuff together. So you wouldn't expect a large proportion of those hired to be in finance. You also find human resources as well, obviously, is a major component of that, of the hires that are coming too. So I wouldn't say any more than 5%. I'm guessing, by the way, so don't hold me to it, but I wouldn't say it's a huge amount. But that's the new roles coming on board as a result of the large projects. What you also need to think about is the kind of organic and inorganic growth that's taking place in existing groups, where the groups are now getting to such a size and such complexity that they do need people to look after the challenges that come with taxation and accounting and the two together, let alone data, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on. So I wish I could give you a more accurate number, but I'm afraid I'm not able to.
Okay, but it's a good amount. I know it won't be 100,000, but there is a need. There is a need, and
Definitely.
candidates are willing, to be bold enough and to explore a new geography and to grow with the economy. There is great scope. There is great scope. So that's
Yeah. I would say so, and I think obviously there are loads of recruiting agents and so on who are looking for people, and all the big four are looking. Let alone the medium-sized firms and the boutique firms like MMJS. We're forever canvassing for good talent. So there's no shortage of opportunity in that regard.
Yeah, great. Because I see even you're hiring. I mean, I see the hiring on LinkedIn. So could be.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us about MMJS? Like, what is this firm exactly about? And
Sure.
are there a lot of boutique firms in Saudi? What's happening? If you just tell us.
Yeah, sure. MMJS has been in the region for the last 7 years. It's a Dubai-based consultancy, and the consulting arm has kind of three main focuses: data, tax, and corporation services in Saudi Arabia. It's been in Saudi for 2 years, and we now have 30 people in our business. I think there are 50 or 60 in Dubai. And we also have offices in Bahrain and Oman. And we're looking to get into Kuwait and Qatar once VAT is introduced in those two countries, because they use VAT as a kind of launch pad for entering into the country. The implementation of VAT, I should be more specific. So yeah, it's a dynamic business. It's grown very quickly in the last 2 years. Started off with my partner Anas and one other. Lots of energy, strong, talented young people, which is great. It's multicultural, so there's a good contingent of Saudis, but people from other parts of the world as well. Very, very talented bunch. So it's exciting, and we're looking to grow strongly over the next 3 years. Already, there's lots of brand recognition. I don't know if you follow the post on LinkedIn. There's always some event or some kind of post on some change, whether it's been in Saudi or Oman or the UAE. Happy to collaborate. So it's an interesting model, because we don't do any audit, so we're not bound by that kind of regulatory constraint, which is a good thing. I think clients are interested in deviating from the large accounting firms, partly because of the restrictions, but also they're not the most agile of organizations, with respect. And a business which is solely focused on tax and tax-related consulting, I think definitely has a place in this market. I've seen it happen in other countries, so there's no reason why it shouldn't happen in Saudi. In terms of boutique tax firms, there aren't very many that I know of. I think there's probably one boutique law firm and possibly 2 or 3 boutique tax firms. And then it's next tier up is the second tier of the accounting firms like the Grant Thorntons and Baker Tilly's of this world. And then you've got the big four. So there's room. And I must say, everybody I speak to now wants to set up their own business, which is quite interesting. So people see the opportunity, but it's easier said than done, as you can imagine. And what clients we think are looking for is a good alternative to the larger firms. So quality is essential. Pragmatism is essential. Innovation is essential. And the market's responding. It's actually quite gratifying that they're seeing what we have to offer and they're liking it, which is really good.
Okay, so there is room for, you could say, expat consulting firms in Saudi. There is room, but it is getting competitive, right? Because at the moment in the
Yeah.
UAE, yeah, okay, there are a lot of boutique firms, there are a lot of big ones, right? So Saudi is yet to, yet there's still room for a lot of folks to set up their practices there. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that the only thing I'd say is setting up a business in Saudi, depending on the industry, let's say, that you want to pursue, the requirements can range from, kind of minor amounts of capital required to quite substantial amounts of capital, depending on essentially the industries they want to protect for Saudis, which makes sense. It's not the only country that does that, and I think it makes sense to look after your own population. I've got no problem with that. So most of the time, you still see lots of consultants flying in and out of neighboring countries, specifically Dubai.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've heard about the regional headquarters requirement. So from 1 January next year, any business that has contracts with the Saudi government, which, as you know, is pervasive, it's all over the economy, has to set up its regional headquarters in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh specifically, in order to maintain these kind of contractual opportunities. And that's causing an awful lot of thinking. So we're going to see more regional headquarters in Saudi. And from there, I think there will be more business springing as those kind of decision makers are sat in Riyadh, for example, helping businesses, develop and grow and seeking opportunities. So it's not a straightforward exercise. However, if you're determined and you do have the opportunity and you can see the opportunity, absolutely there's room. But I think that they discourage the guys that want to, come up and set up shop for short length of time and disappear. That won't work here. You won't get a chance to do business here. So if you come to Saudi, you've got to be serious. Otherwise, they actually won't entertain you. And it's kind of, dare I say, a little different to Dubai, where I know setting up a business is a lot easier. Yep. In Saudi, it's more difficult for the reasons I've just mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, it's way easier in Dubai. It's really easy, but it's not so straightforward in Saudi. So that's okay. No. So you've taken a lot of factors. You can't just make a decision and say, hey, and it takes a lot of money as well, as you mentioned.
It does. It does.
Okay.
It does. Yeah. Okay. And I won't bore you with all the detail because mostly I don't know all of it, but we have incorporation specialists at MMJS, and they take clients through the process from the beginning to end, because there are licenses, there are permissions, there are registrations, and there are requirements, all of which basically you have to get through, otherwise you won't be able to trade. There are different ways of setting up your business, whether it's a joint venture or single ownership or what have you, but yeah, you do need to do your homework, otherwise it's difficult.
Okay, that's great. So Nick, you also mentioned about the big four's hiring, right? So do you want to elaborate what kind of roles are they hiring for? And what kind of roles? And other than the big four, what other consulting firms are hiring? Because I have a lot of friends, as you said, who work in Saudi through the week, and Saturday, Sunday they're in the UAE, right? But they're actually employed by So what's happening? If you could just elaborate on that, and what are the major projects? We know about Vision 2030, but apart from that, what's going on? Like what are
the big projects that spring to mind are the Red Sea project, which is a whole development of that Red Sea coast. NEOM, which is a specific area on the Red Sea, which is going to be set up for tourism. You've got Alula, which is a heritage site, which again is set up for tourism. You've got in Riyadh, you've got Qadiyah, which is out to the west of the city, which again is industrial, commercial, residential. I visited a client yesterday at Sports Boulevard, which is another huge development, which is again centered around generating kind of sporting affinity, if you want to call it that, but it's a massive part of Riyadh. They're cutting a swathe from east to west, a corridor of about 70 to 80 kilometers. You've got the line, which everybody I'm sure has heard of. And beyond that, you've got projects from Aramco, for example, which are more interest specific. You've got the large manufacturers and distributors setting up more factories. So, if you can imagine, if you build those large projects or set them up, you need people to populate them, and people need goods, services, accommodation. So there's a downstream effect as well. So those are just some of the examples. And it's not just Big Four, because you've got all the big consulting houses like McKinsey, Bain, all the guys are here. They're doing strategy, they're doing operational efficiency. There's a huge amount of work in cyber at the moment, both in cybersecurity as well as developing cyber strategy. Lots of work in, I mentioned construction and all the downstream from that. The financial services arena is growing. The market, the capital markets are still fairly illiquid. It don't have the kind of trading volumes you'd have in one of the larger exchanges around the world, but that will come because some of the major merchant banks, they're all here, and we've advised on some quite complex structuring and some of the products which I would have thought may not necessarily have got to Saudi quite yet because of the liquidity of the market. But they're here because you have a lot of people in Saudi investing outside and needing to raise capital both in and out Saudi, and then guys outside of Saudi wanting to invest in Saudi and having to raise capital outside. And so there's a lot of flow. It's a really dynamic environment. If you can imagine, although I think the GDP of Saudi Arabia is about $900 billion around that number. If you added up all the projects, it runs into the trillions. So clearly funding is needed to kind of ensure those projects not only take off, but are completed. So if you kind of think of that gap, then you can imagine there's a lot of need for capital, and therefore professionals will know how to raise it and how to manage it and how to deliver. So it's a full service economy. And if you think it should be, because you've got 34, 35 million people who all need the services that we all enjoy. So Saudi's no different. And so you have exactly the same kind of setup in terms of consumer need and consumer use. That would be my comment on the opportunities.
Yeah, that's well answered. So I got a broad view of what's happening. Okay, and why is there so many consultants out there? Yeah, BCG, McKinsey, right? Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. And what about auditing as a profile?
In terms of what the skill set.
In terms of hiring and in terms of expats or international talent looking at auditing as a career.
Yeah. Lots of audit firms, and if you can imagine, and many of them are CPA, so they're not necessarily they're software trained. So the Saudi authority does regulate them, but many of them are trained in the UK or South Africa or Pakistan, India, America, Europe, and the firms hire from all over the world, and they still have a program of taking on article clerks. I couldn't tell you what the numbers are, but it's no different, frankly, than any other country in terms of the numbers of article clerks they take on. So that whole process goes on here. What you find is the smaller, more local firms won't do listed entities because they require a slightly different skill set. Plus, you also require a network because you need to compare notes to make sure you're kept up to date. So that's kind of restricted to the Big Four and the second-tier accounting firms to do listed entities. But again, the opportunities are there, and I see people joining the firm all the time through LinkedIn and so on. So they're always looking for good people. So I don't think there's any restriction there at all.
They're always looking for good people. So
absolutely,
good talent is valued. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So what are the key skills and qualities one should have to build a successful career, particularly in the GCC, or you could say Saudi? Certain aspects beyond technical.
Yeah, look, I think the way I look at it, what I look for is attitude. Do you have the right mindset to want to succeed with your colleagues in what is essentially a foreign or alien environment? Okay, that's the first thing. Have you got what it takes? And you can't really teach that or coach that. Unfortunately, either you have that desire or you don't. And luckily, most professionals are made of good stuff, and so they generally are ready to take on those challenges. Then the next thing is, do you have the skills? And that's everything from people skills to tax technical or accounting technical skills. And I wouldn't underestimate that, because it's what sets you apart. I mean, two things. In one way, it kind of is a basic requisite to be in the game, to be good. But being good isn't enough anymore. You need to be better than that, because competition is quite fierce. But also the complexities of the challenges that you face are complicated, and difficult. So you need to be willing to learn, and as my old professor used to say, honor the subject. So I look for the right attitude, the skills, the desire to turn those skills, hone those skills, should I say. I mentioned intellectual curiosity before. I'm certainly not always convinced that, let's say, professionals want to really learn their subject in detail, and that certainly in my case isn't just learning about tax in my country, but understanding how the tax works in other adjacent countries, understanding how commerce works. So, for example, getting good industry understanding is really, really critical. Whatever the industry may be, what sets you apart often is that you understand the industry, and therefore you understand the business. A number of times clients have said to me, "Oh, fantastic, you understand my business," which tells me that not every consultant takes the time. So those are key things. Willingness to develop people, willingness to lead, meaning I'm not talking about leading a practice or leading a massive team. It could be 2 or 3 of you, but sometimes you have to step up and say, right, let's do it this way. And not always leave it to the manager or the senior manager. So that willingness to take the lead is also a key attribute. The willingness to consult, very important, because you do need counsel. You do need to know if you're on the right track. So there's a whole mixture of skills which I think are required to make a good consultant. Not all of these attributes are there on day one. They don't have to be, but it's important to understand what they are and to develop in that direction, in my view.
That's amazing. So you don't have to have all of those skills on day one, but once you realize, you got to work on them and grow with them.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a static environment anymore by any means. I've been out of the kingdom for about a year, and I'm surprised, or was surprised, I'm not surprised anymore, at how much development has taken place in such a short space of time, and how much the level of knowledge and skill required to advise clients has already gone up a notch. So this is not some place you go if you think, oh well, I can coast for a while. Believe me, you have to be able to do your work, and that's again, I think quite a change from when I first came to Saudi. There were obviously some people who maybe didn't feel the need to contribute as they should. It happens in every environment, I'm afraid. But they're not here anymore. They and the nationality is irrelevant. Those people are to one side, and now you're getting strong professionals, junior, maybe inexperienced, but good quality across the board, which is really cool.
Work ethic is very important.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And often, irrespective of the people around you, you still have to do your thing, and not be kind of influenced unduly at times. And that's what I look for when I hire, that kind of set of attributes.
That's some great advice. Okay, we have a question from.
Sure.
Okay, we have a question from
Mm.
Eamon. He says, any advice on tax education and qualifications?
Yes, it's interesting. Growing up in the UK, you didn't need to have an accounting or tax qualification to be admitted to do articles in the Big Four, as long as you had a good degree, etc. Spending time in South Africa, most of the people we hired had been doing accounting since they were, 16 years old, which I found quite strange. Saudi is somewhere in the middle. What's important if you want a professional qualification is for accounting, ACCA is accepted, and CPA. So it's kind of standard professional, globally recognized accounting qualifications. For tax, the Chartered Institute of Tax in the UK, so the CTA qualification is recognized and sought after, and the ADIT, let's get that acronym right, that qualification is beginning to have more traction. It's a terrific qualification. It's not quite as detailed as a CTA, because CTA is very focused on UK taxation, and that in itself, as you can imagine, is quite complicated. But ADIT is a little bit more international. But those are, in my view, if you don't have them, then I would make every effort to get those qualifications, because again, as a tax professional, I think you want to stand out, and if you have even a master's in taxation or ADIT or CTA, you do stand out, and that's got to be a bonus for you if you can get those qualifications.
Okay, so a qualification matters. It does make a difference. Okay.
Definitely.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
When you're talking about CPA, it's a Saudi CPA, right? It's not the US CPA, or
No, there are people here with qualifications from all over the world. So CPA from the UK, from the US, Australia.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The important thing is, if you want to become SOC qualified, you do have to convert. But you won't get the chance to convert unless you've got the qualification in the first place. So come to the country with the qualification that you have. If it's from your own country, that's fine. But you do need to be a professional accountant or auditor, or whatever the term is, as a minimum. For tax, it's always slightly different, because there hasn't really been that well-constructed path towards professional qualifications in tax. Most of the time, it's kind of voluntary. Although when I started out, for us, it was compulsory at Anderson all those years ago. But generally speaking, it's not a prerequisite. But I would say, if you do want to distinguish yourself, absolutely do the tax qualification.
Okay. Fair enough. If there's a senior professional who wants to join in, say, into tax, okay, great guy has a question, great guy or girl has all the questions, whatever, right?
Yeah.
All the qualifications, I mean, sorry. So how do they get updated, or how do they understand the Saudi tax system? Because it's quite a mature tax system, right? So what advice would you give them? How do they start?
Look, I think as someone who recruits, I'm not looking for you to know the Saudi tax system if you're not in the country. I think that would be unfair. What I'm looking to understand is your history of consulting, if that's your specialism, the type of stuff you've done, with the type of industry or client. And what we do is we tend to give our candidates case studies, ask lots of technical questions, but we give them a case study which they can mull over, give them some reference material that they can refer to, and then after a few days they come back with the answer. Now, sometimes in tax there is a right and wrong answer, of course, but mostly what we're looking for is how you think, how you prepare your response. Did you ask any supplementary questions? Are you actually trying to understand the problem and then therefore give advice, or are you simply trying to get through the exercise? So it's a question of how you approach the problem that we test. Clearly, if you're a senior manager and you say you're a zakat specialist, you will get questions about zakat, and you probably do need to know the answers. But that's how we judge. If you're in the country, then it's slightly different, I guess, as I said. But if you're from outside, it's really your thought process and your approach that's tested more than anything else. I was dealing with a young lady the other day from India who doesn't know Saudi taxes, and we gave her a case study, and her answer was outstanding. And that's because good mind, good process. We gave her some research material because you can't always access stuff from outside Saudi, unfortunately. Sometimes it's the Arabic language, but sometimes you just can't get to it. It's geo-locked. But that's the kind of test we give, and that's what we're looking for.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Okay. As a coach and as a mentor, what advice would you give, young, ambitious professionals, in the finance world, okay, with the finance qualification, tax,
Yeah.
looking at building their career, like what would you tell them? Should they go to the UK? Should they go? What is your advice?
Okay, from a location point of view, I guess it really depends on what you're trying to get out of your career. So the UK, you'll get interesting opportunities, especially if you're in one of the larger firms. And I don't necessarily mean the Big Four, because there are lots of decent sized firms in the UK you can get to as an audit candidate. Law is a bit more difficult because every country has its own legal system, and so you'd have to requalify almost certainly. Certainly, as an audit candidate, it would be a conversion, but not necessarily requalification. Definitely, the Middle East is a great place to come, and you can further your career both technically and obviously professionally in the Middle East. And I think the restrictions are not quite so heavy in terms of immigration, for example. So I would look at Middle East definitely. If you want to get to the States, by all means go, and then Europe. Now, so that's kind of location. But really, the if you have this kind of understanding, and not all of us do when we're young, what kind of environment do you want to be in, and what kind of people do you want to be with, is really, really important. And it's not always possible to learn these things, as I understand, and understand them when you're very young. But as soon as you can, it's important to get a grasp of, okay, who am I really, and how do I like to work? And am I working in an environment that looks after me? And looking after isn't just about money and let's say having a nice chair and a nice desk. It's about the sentiment of the culture that you are in. And we all talk about issues of work culture, toxicity and otherwise. I mean, those are kind of big topics at the moment, and they will remain so, I'm sure. Then I would say, what really excites you in the work that you do? It's really important to have almost like a love affair, if you want to call it that, with the subject. The passion for the subject is important because it sets you apart, and it also drives you to do more. We talked about learning your subject and understanding it. Often that passion drives you to do more. Important to work with people and to be sympathetic to people and empathetic if as far as you can. Sometimes the work has to get done, and unfortunately sympathies go out the window because you have deadlines. But by and large, it's possible to be caring in your environment and still get the work done. And then never stop learning. I mentioned it before, but I've done management training outside of tax. I've done my coaching outside of tax. I've done business qualifications, marketing qualifications, many of which don't obviously have a link back to tax. but they have a link back to commerce, to business, to development. And they help you see the world slightly differently. They help you see your world slightly differently. The thing I would advise people against doing is getting too deep into the subject to the point where they don't see what's happening outside. Because at the end of the day, we are the tail and we shouldn't be wagging the dog. So understanding commerce and economics is really important of your environment. I think that also gives you an edge, because many of our compatriots, if you like, ignore that stuff. And it's really important to get a handle on that, as far as I'm concerned. So those would be some nuggets that I would leave with the guys on the call in terms of career development.
That's amazing. And about, you're a coach as well. So how do people connect with you, and what kind of, professionals would you be interested in coaching? Say, if they want to approach you, what should they keep in mind? Or they could just ping you on LinkedIn and it's fine.
Absolutely, no problem at all. I think from a coaching point of view, I try to work with, I'd say, manager upwards. But as you can imagine, I've coached at every level, quite frankly. So I don't mind. I have no problem. I'm more than happy to help and give some advice where it can be, fruitful. So I'd be delighted. I mean, clearly, my LinkedIn address is there. If anybody wants to send me a message, they're welcome to. I've had a few messages over the years. They are quite funny at times. They come out of nowhere, but I'm happy to help. I think I can't speak for the audience. I can speak for myself here. I grew up not having an insight into this professional world. And all the people that helped me along the way, and there have been many, helped me understand how to be a professional. And then the rest, I guess, is up to you. So there's no shame in asking for support and help when you don't understand the context in which you're working, which will not be an unusual feeling, I would imagine, for many people on this call. It's normal. And it's up to people like me to give you some support as far as possible to help you take those next steps. So I'm more than willing to support where required.
Thank you so much. So through your journey, you've been through a lot of, like, when I look at LinkedIn, it's a perfect, wow, senior partner, Saudi, the growth is amazing, but there was a lot of challenges and you had to navigate through it all.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Okay, cool. So Nick, thank you so much for the time, and thank you everyone joining in. If you have any questions, you could text me. And if you want to connect with Nick, he's on LinkedIn, so feel free. And we'll make a video of this. We'll post it on LinkedIn. We'll also make an article, and we'll also share bite-sized, snippets, so people can consume on the go. So yeah, that's from us. So Nick, thank you so much. Means a lot. Thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And good luck to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Okay, bye.